So this is the 2150 hours GMT edition of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions KhoodeelaarTV television channel on Friday, 10th of March 2023. This is going to have the topical point about the Ibila, Cruella, Suella, braver men lying and denying that she was behaving like the Nazis, because that is the accusation that was made against Suella, Cruella, Ibilar, a Braverman, by a survivor of the Nazis in Germany, who has lived in the United Kingdom ever since escaping. When that survivor confronted Suella, Ibilar, Cruella, Braverman with the evidence, and the question about Suella, Ibilar, Cruella using the term invasion about migrants, asylum seekers. Now let's actually get the real reference. Now this is an item on the metro.co.uk website, and the heading is Holocaust survivor slams Suella Braverman over language. And let's go to the Holocaust survivor slams Suella Braverman's frightening invasion rhetoric. Controversial plans. But for Joan Solta, who won an MBE for her work on Holocaust education, the member for Parliament for Fairham's words are akin to the language the Nazis used to justify killing her family and 6 million Jews. Speaking at a brief Braverman's constituency yesterday, the 83-year-old had asked Braverman, "I'm a child survivor of 1943. I was forced to flee my birthplace in Belgium and went across war-torn Europe and dangerous seas until I was able to come to the UK in 1947. Now, when I hear you saying words against refugees like swarms and invasions, I am reminded of the language used to dehumanize and justify the murder of my family and millions of others. Why do you find the need to use that kind of language? John Salter, MBE, said, "This language is designed to justify the murder of my family and millions of others." What we shall be doing in this edition is going into some of the details of the day's various statements and explanations surrounding the BBC's behavior. Now, this is the item that I'm going to put on the Khoodeelaar Twitter account. This very item from the Metro, which is a detailed item from the metro.co.uk. So let's check on the, as I said, I'm going into some details about this particular topic, and let's check on what the Wikipedia is saying in their entry about British culture. Well, it says the entry is headed Culture of the United Kingdom. Well, that should be good enough. British culture is influenced by the combined nation's history, its historically Christian religious life, its interaction with cultures of Europe, the traditions of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, and the impact of the British Empire. Although British culture is a distinct entity, the individual cultures of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are diverse and have varying degrees of overlap and distinctiveness. British literature is particularly esteemed. The modern novel was invented in Britain, and playwrights, poets, and authors are among its most prominent cultural figures. Britain has also made notable contribution to music, cinemas, art, architecture, and television. And the UK is also the home of the Church of England, the state church, the mother church of the Anglican Communion, the third largest Christian denomination. Britain contains some of the world's oldest universities, has made many contributions to philosophy, science, technology, and medicine, and is the birthplace of many prominent scientists and inventions. The Industrial Revolution began in the UK and had a profound effect on the family, socio-economic, and cultural conditions of the world. As a result of the British Empire, significant British influence can be observed in the language, law, culture, and institutions of its former colonies, most of which are members of the Commonwealth of Nations. Now I'm reading without any quotation. So the Wikipedia, the internet, doesn't have appropriate topics that I'm looking for. So this piece, dated the 1st of November 2022, had an analysis. Is Home Affairs editor of The Guardian, Rajiv Sayal. Invasion of the UK, experts dubious of Suella Braverman's claim. Anwar Solomon says, an invasion? Suella Braverman, this refugee crisis is of the government's own making. As she fought for her political survival in Parliament on Monday, Suella Braverman claimed the south coast of England is being invaded by asylum seekers. Her claim has been refuted by migration experts, which believe it falls down on a number of fronts. Madeleine Sumption, the director of the Oxford Migration Observatory, said, this is not an invasion. It's not an army. But if instead she is referring to the number of people coming, we can compare the figures to other countries and see that the numbers coming into the UK are relatively manageable. 17 European Union countries received larger numbers of asylum applications per capita last year, according to analysis of official figures by the Oxford Migration Observatory, OMO. The UK received 8 asylum applications for every 10,000 people across the country in 2020 to 2021, the figures show. This compared with just under 23 for Germany and just under 18 in France. Cyprus received 153 applications for every 10,000 people in the country, the highest among 32 European countries. So let's move on to the, and it says, the UK receives far fewer asylum applications per capita than other European countries. Braverman appeared to argue that the UK is facing disproportionately more asylum seekers than at other times in our recent history, saying the numbers were unprecedented. When we face so many arrivals so quickly, it is practically impossible to procure more than 1,000 beds at short notice, she said. Figures from the Home Office, that is the United Kingdom Interior Ministry, showing the numbers of people claiming asylum from 1979 to 2021 demonstrate that the United Kingdom is on an upward curve now, but it is not unprecedented. The number of asylum claims in 2021 was below 60,000, well below the peaks of more than 80,000 of an early 2000, when there were conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and the former Yugoslavia. The Syrian refugee crisis beginning in 2014 caused a slight rise in overall numbers, But the current peak is closer to the levels in 1991, when there were conflicts in Sri Lanka and Somalia. The trend of increasing numbers of asylum claims at the end of 2021 has continued into 2022. Data to the year ended March 2022 show a considerable year on year increase in asylum claims generally and in small boat arrivals for the quarterly period. Sumption said that the numbers of asylum seekers have come in waves with occasional steep rises depending on external pressures. Asylum numbers have always gone up and down over time. There is plenty of research showing that asylum numbers are volatile and governments need some flexibility to deal with the changes, she said. The significant and highly visible trend that has become central to cultural political debate. I'll read that again because there was an error in one word that I spoke. The significant and highly visible trend that has become central to current political debate is the rise in small boat arrivals. Almost 40,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats so far in 2022, according to government data, the highest number since figures were first gathered in 2018. In 2021, the total was 28,526, while in 2020 it was 8,404. Nearly all of those arriving by small boats claim asylum, according to the Home Office and Ministry of Defense. Over the year ending in June, small boat arrivals accounted for half of the 60,000 asylum claims. The top five nationalities entering by small boats in the first quarter of 2022 were Afghan, Iranian, Iraqi, Syrian, and Eritrean, all of whom have very high chances of being granted asylum. Colin Yeo, a barrister and author specializing in immigration, has pointed out that the numbers arriving by small boat are low compared with those granted through official schemes. A total of 75,764 visas were issued in the last year under the Hong Kong scheme for British nationals. In the last 9 months, almost double that number, 140,000, entered the UK through the Ukrainian scheme. Over the last year, a quarter of refugee arrivals into the UK came by small boats or lorries, he wrote. Now, this two references, one to Ukraine and the other to Hong Kong, because the Hong Kong people are seen by Britain as the imperial legacy of Britain, whereas the people of Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Eritrea are seen differently with prejudice and bias, very strong prejudice and bias against them. Whereas the attitude towards the Hong Kong ones under the Hong Kong scheme for British nationals and the Ukrainians, regardless of what nationality, is an open armed approach. So it's racist and it's totally against the law of international treaties and conventions that the UK has been signatory to and remains signed up to, despite the hostile and desperately, critically untruthful rhetoric mouthed by the criminal Cruella, Evila, Suella Braverman. So the rhetoric that Evilar, Cruelar, Suella is using is reminiscent of the rhetoric and language used by the Nazis. And that accusation has not been made by Gary Lineker. That accusation has been made by a Jewish woman survivor of the Holocaust. So, why is it that there is no outcry about that Jewish woman saying Suella Braverman is herself guilty of using Nazi German language? So we shall check again the let's check the website of the Guardian news website. The BBC's corruption has not started only with the Suella Braverman being put in place as the incumbent secretary, Home Secretary, Interior Minister. The BBC has been controlled always. The BBC has always been controlled by racists and by liars. And the slogan that John Reith, who is described as the founder of the BBC, was, let's check what the mythology about John Reith says. And then we shall go back to continuing the diagnosis of today's BBC behavior against Gary Lineker. So John Charles Welsham Reith, first Baron Reith, born 20th of July 1889 and died 16th of June 1971, was a British broadcasting executive who established the tradition of independent public service broadcasting in the United Kingdom. Now, that is the first introduction to this myth. In 1922, he was employed by the BBC, British Broadcasting Company Limited, as its general manager. In 1923, he became its managing director. And in 1927, he was employed as the Director General of the British Broadcasting Corporation, created under a royal charter. That is John Reith's concept of broadcasting as a way of educating the masses marked for a long time the BBC and similar organizations around the world. An engineer by profession and standing at 6 foot 6 inches tall, he was a larger than life figure who was a pioneer in the field. 6 foot 6 inches. Born at Stonehaven, Kincardineshire, Reith was the fifth son and the youngest by 10 years of the 7 children of the Reverend George Reith, a Scottish Presbyterian minister of the College Church at Glasgow, and later moderator of the United Free Church of Scotland. He was to carry strict Presbyterian religious convictions forward into his adult life. Reith was educated at Glasgow Academy, then at Gresham's School, Holt, Norfolk. He spent 2 years at the Royal Technical College at Glasgow, later at the University of Strathclyde, followed by an apprenticeship as an engineer at the North British Locomotive Company. During this time, he joined the Territorials, and in February 1911 was commissioned as an officer in the Scottish Rifles 5th Territorial Battalion. In 1913, he moved to London after obtaining a post at St. S. Pearson and Son through Ernest William Moore, and worked on their construction of the Royal Albert Dock. Reith, who stood a towering 6 foot 6 inches tall, joined up with the 5th Scottish Rifles early in the war and was quickly transferred to the Royal Engineers as a lieutenant. In October 1915, while fighting in France, he was severely wounded by a shrapnel. Sorry, I'll read that again. In October 1915, while fighting in France, he was severely wounded by a sniper's bullet through his left cheek, which nearly cost him his life and left him with a noticeable scar. While lying wounded on a stretcher after the shot, he is reported to have muttered, "I am very angry and I have spoiled a new tunic." During Reed's convalescence, E.W. Moore referred him to a post at Pearson's project, constructing the cordite factory, HM factory Gretna, comprising the fixing of contracts, estimating of costs, taking out quantities, and inspection of materials. In February 1916, he went to work at Remington Arms, Eddystone, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, who were manufacturing the pattern 1914 Enfield Mk1 rifle for the British government, etc., etc. The term Reithianism describes certain principles of broadcasting associated with Lord Reith. These include an equal consideration of all viewpoints, probity, universality, and a commitment to public service. Audiences had little choice apart from the upscale programming of the BBC, a government agency which had a monopoly on broadcasting. Reith, an intensely moralistic executive, was in full charge. His goal was to broadcast all that is best in every department of human knowledge, endeavor, and achievement. The preservation of a high moral tone is obviously of paramount importance. Reed succeeded in building a high wall against an American style free for all in radio, in which the goal was to attract the largest audiences and thereby secure the greatest advertising revenue. There was no paid advertising on the BBC. All the revenue came from the tax on receiving sets. Highbrow audiences, however, greatly enjoyed it. At a time when American, Australian, and Canadian stations were drawing huge audiences cheering for their local teams, with the broadcast of baseball, rugby, and hockey, the BBC emphasized service for a national rather than a regional audience. Boat races were well covered, along with tennis and horse racing, but the BBC was reluctant to spend its severely limited airtime on long football or cricket games, regardless of their popularity. In 1960, Reith returned to the BBC for an interview with John Freeman in the television series Face to Face. When he visited the BBC to record the program, work was being undertaken, and Reith noticed with dismay the girly pin-ups of the workmen. However, one picture was of a Henry Moore sculpture. A third program carpenter, forsooth, he growled. In an interview, he expressed his disappointment at not being fully stretched in his life, especially after leaving the BBC. He claimed that he could have done more than Churchill gave him to do during the war. He also disclosed an abiding dissatisfaction with his life in general. He admitted not realizing soon enough that life is for living and suggested he perhaps still did not acknowledge that fact. He also stated that since his departure as Director General, he had watched almost no television and listened to virtually no radio. When I leave a thing, I leave it, he said. In his later years, he also held directorships at the Phoenix Assurance Company, Tube Investments Limited, the State Building Society, and was the vice chairman of the British Oxygen Company. He took a personal interest in the preservation of the early 19th century frigate HMS Unicorn in 1962. Reith was appointed Lord Rector of Glasgow University from 1965 to 1968. In 67, he finally accepted the much cherished post of Lord High Commissioner to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. His final television appearance was in a 3-part documentary series Glasgow in fall at the age of 81. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were buried at the ancient ruined chapel of Rothimarchas at Inverness-shire. Did I pronounce it correctly? Let's check. Rothimarchas in Inverness-shire. That sounds like another language. Reith wrote 2 volumes of autobiography, Into the Wind in 1956 and Wearing Spars in 1966. 2 biographical volumes appeared shortly after his death. Only the Wind Will Listen by Andrew Boyle in 1972, and a volume of his diaries edited by the Oxford academic Charles Stewart, 1975. It was not until The Expense of Glory, 1993, by Ian McIntyre, that Reith's unexpurgated diaries and letters were published. Now, here is a reference to Attitude to Fascism. In 1975, excerpts from Reith's diary were published, which showed he had during the 1930s harbored pro-fascist views. That's where I was hoping to get. On 9th of March, now this is yesterday, 1933, he wrote, I am pretty certain that the Nazis will clean things up and put Germany on the way to being a real power in Europe again. They are being ruthless and most determined. Following the July 1934 Night of the Long Knives, in which the Nazis ruthlessly exterminated their internal dissidents, Reith wrote, I really admire the way Hitler has cleaned up what looked like an incipient revolt. I really admire the drastic action taken, which were obviously badly needed. After Czechoslovakia was invaded by the Nazis in 1939, he wrote, Hitler continues his magnificent efficiency. Reith also expressed admiration for Benito Mussolini. Reith's daughter, Marista Leisham, wrote that in the 1930s her father did everything possible to keep Winston Churchill and other anti appeasement conservatives off the airwaves. So, this is what I was hoping to come across. All the praise about Reith are exposed as unjustified, and his morality nothing but the dressings of a fascist. Now, this is an update on The Guardian, which says that the BBC is to broadcast Match of the Day without presenters after Gary Lineker's suspension. Decision taken after the BBC takes its highest paid presenter off air and his fellow broadcasters refuse to appear out of solidarity with him. Well done to them. This one is an item posted at 21:27 GMT. Match of the Day will be broadcast without any presenters or pundits this weekend after the main host, Gary Lineker, was suspended from the BBC for breaching impartiality guidelines over his criticism of the government's asylum policies. In a dramatic and unexpected escalation of crisis that has been brewing all week, the corporation took the decision to remove its highest paid presenter from its flagship football show after he was criticized by Tory MPs and the right wing media. Lineker's suspension immediately led to displays of solidarity from Lineker's co hosts, Ian Wright and Alan Shearer, who publicly announced that they would not be turning up to present Saturday's show. Faced with an effective strike by its on screen staff and unable to find willing replacements, the BBC took the unprecedented decision to announce that the Premier League highlights program would go ahead without any hosts or studio presentation. It will only feature it will feature only match footage. A BBC spokesperson said, "Some of our pundits have said that they don't wish to appear on the program while we seek to resolve the situation with Gary. We understand their position and we have decided that the program will focus on match action without studio presentation or punditry." Ministers put the BBC under pressure after Lineker posted tweets this week criticizing Rishi Sunak's new asylum policy. He likened the language used by ministers, not the ministers, about asylum seekers to that used by Germany in the 1930s, a comparison labeled offensive by the Home Secretary Suella Braverman. But we have discussed already John Reith being a fascist admirer. A BBC spokesperson said Lineker would be off air until an agreement was reached on his future use of social media. If Lineker, who has 2 years left on his contract to present Match of the Day, refuses to back down, then it opens up the possibility of him leaving the corporation. Lineker was taken off air on Friday afternoon, despite making it clear that he wanted to host this weekend's edition of the program. When it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him, but we have said that he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. The Channel 5 news presenter Dan Walker was live on air while exchanging text messages with Lineker. According to Walker, Lineker emphasized that it was the BBC's decision to take him off screen, saying, "They've told me I've had to step back." Wright, the former England footballer and a regular co-presenter, swiftly said he would not be working on this Saturday's Match of the Day as a result of Lineker's suspension. "Everybody knows what match of the day means to me. But I've told the BBC I won't be doing it tomorrow. Solidarity, he tweeted. Shearer, who had also been booked to appear on Saturday's show, confirmed that he would not turn up to work, leaving the BBC without any mainstream presenters for one of its best known programs. Regular pundit and former Manchester City defender Micah Richards backed the decision of Wright and Shearer, tweeting, I was not due to be working on match of the day tomorrow, but if I was, I'd find myself taking the same decision that Ian Wright and Alan Shearer have. BBC presenter Jermaine Janas BBC presenter Jermaine Janas also said he was standing with his fellow pundits and Gary Lineker. He tweeted, "Been on air with the one show. I wasn't down to be doing much of the day tomorrow, but if I was, I would have said no and stood with my fellow pundits and Gary Lineker." Presenter, former Arsenal and England player Alex Scott also appeared to rule herself out of presenting Saturday's edition of Match of the Day amid speculation that she might take over. Scott tweeted a picture of US politician Bernie Sanders saying, "Nah, not me," alongside the caption FYI. Mark Chapman also reportedly ruled himself out. While suspending Lineker for breaching impartiality guidelines, the BBC chair, Richard Sharp, has faced calls to quit in recent weeks. It was recently revealed that Sharp, a previous Tory donor, had made the introductions between Boris Johnson and one of the former Prime Minister's who became a guarantor for substantial loan. Sharp later claimed that he had acted in good faith as a go between. Labour said his position was increasingly untenable. The journalist John Sopel, who has held several senior positions at the BBC, said, "Luckily, it's not where you need to declare facilitating an 800,000 loan to a prime minister while applying for a job as chairman of the broadcasting organization." The former Manchester United England defender Gary Neville, a commentator for Sky Sports, said, "The decision was what happened when you take on the Tories and the system." Philippa Childs, head of the entertainment trade union Back2, which represents thousands of BBC workers, said the broadcaster's decision was deeply concerning. It will give the appearance that they have bowed to political pressure from ministers to take someone off air for disagreeing with the policies of the current government, she said. Taken with the ongoing controversy over the appointment of BBC chairman, who has a much more important role in upholding the reputation of the BBC, and who has not stepped back while under investigation, it also risks giving the impression of double standards on these issues. Lineker's comments dominated coverage of the government's news asylum policy and were publicly criticized by a number of cabinet ministers. BBC sources suggested his decision to double down on the comments in further tweets fanning the story exasperated senior BBC management. One issue of the BBC, I'll read that again. One issue for the BBC today, given that he has extensive business interests outside the corporation and has shown no indication that he will retract his comments. The BBC could face accusations of censorship on behalf of the government if it reinstates Lineker with an agreement to curtail his social media use. However, if Lineker leaves, it will lose one of its most familiar presenters while also facing accusations that the shadow culture secretary accused the BBC of giving in to its enemies. This feels like an overreaction brought on by a right wing media frenzy obsessed with undermining the BBC. I note the same cries of impartiality were totally absent when the BBC chair failed to disclose aspects of his close friendship with the then Prime Minister. The BBC has long grappled with what impartiality should look like in an era where many of its leading presenters have enormous social media followings and struggle to see why they should be banned from sharing their personal views. Amid threats to the BBC's funding from the Conservative government, the Director General Tim Davie in 2020 introduced regulations restricting what staff can publicly say and what views they can share. The strictest rules apply to staff working in the BBC News division, with less restrictive terms applying to staff in other parts of the organization. Lineker, who has repeatedly shared his political views on his personal social media account, has long been a target for right wing media outlets and Tory MPs over his views and their 1.3 million salary. The presenter was personally singled out when the BBC launched the crackdown on social media posts. One problem for Davy was that Lineker is employed on a fixed contract, meaning he is not on the BBC staff. As a result, he is covered by a specific rule in the impartiality guidelines labeled the Lineker Clause by BBC staff, which states that some individuals have an additional responsibility to the BBC because of their high profile. The rules state we expect these individuals to avoid taking sides on party political issues or political controversies and to take care when addressing public policy matters. In response to the BBC's decision on Friday, a spokesperson for the Department for Culture, Media and Sports said individual cases are a matter for the BBC. Fuck you liars. On Thursday, Lineker said he had no intention of stepping aside from his role. There is continued speculation in broadcasting circles that Lineker could be poached by a commercial rival as broadcasters and streaming services prepare their bids for the rights to show Premier League games from 2025 onwards. Lineker's business interests include owning a substantial stake in Goalhanger Podcasts, which makes the popular podcast The Rest is History and The Rest is Politics. This one is not going to end with much cheering events turning up for Rishi Sunak or Cruella Suella Ibila Braverman. We shall be continuing, of course, this essay length diagnostics on the role of the BBC, on Gary Lineker, and on the language used by the Nazis and the language the Nazis used, praised by the BBC's Director General, John Reith, in due course. There is an item dated today on the website The Global Herald, is headed First Woman Prosecuted in the UK over ISIS Believes Shamima Begum Deserves a Second Chance. That is on ITV News. ITV News published this video item entitled First Woman Prosecuted in UK over ISIS Believes Shamima Begum Deserves Second Chance. Tarina Shakil was 24 when she fled with her child to Syria to join ISIS in 2014. After escaping, she managed to come back home, where she became the first woman to be prosecuted in the UK for joining the terrorist group. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Since then, she says she has been de-radicalized and believes people like herself, such as Shamima Begum, deserve a second chance. Amani Ibrahimi reports, ITV News YouTube channel. So that's the video that is 11 minutes long.
I ran away to Syria to live in the Islamic State.
She was found guilty in Britain of joining the Islamic group
to seek a pure Muslim life under Sharia law. She adopted the IS flag on her Facebook profile.
I escaped, came back to England.
Tarina Shakil.
I chose to risk my life to escape, to come back. And I did that because I made a mistake.
There'll be people that will listen to your story and they'll think, how do you just switch that off?
August 2014. That's where Tarina's story starts, when she reactivated her Facebook after her marriage ended. Much better in Syria, a country which saw some of its land under the control of ISIS.
In my personal life, I was going through a lot of things. I was not happy. There was a relationship breakdown, and at the same time talking to people that were saying, you know, you need to come and live here. I had the same issues as you. You'll go to hell if you stay there. Then I really started to think about it.
Tarina had originally planned to go to Turkey for a holiday with her child, and while she was there, she would make her mind up about whether she should cross the border into Syria, where the Islamic State were.
I would say I was 80% sure that I was going to go on to travel to Syria, but it wasn't 100%. I said, let me see how far I get. Let me see. Anything can happen. It might not happen. So many people get stopped. So many people. It just might not be for me.
Through a network of people who had given her details on who to meet where, Tarina had managed to make it to the border.
The guys would come and take people in a van, drive to, like, desert land, barren land, farmland. Nobody lives there. It's just literally sand. And basically tell you where to run from this part to that point. Then there would be another man waiting, and then you'd have to run further where there would be another man who would point you in which direction. And at the other side in Syria, there was another truck waiting, and then eventually I ended up in Raqqa. And I'll never forget it, when I seen the black flag of ISIS for the first time in real life, that was a big moment of realization for me, because that was the moment that I realized that this is actually real. I'm actually here.
The house where Tarina arrived at in Raqqa was a place where unmarried women were expected to stay until they found a husband. From these selfies, it might look like she'd finally found her place, but Tarina says she had to do what was expected to fit in.
That was a part of the life there. They were things that you were expected to do. Like, if they brought out a gun, you know, you're living with a bunch of fanatics. All of the women wanted to take a picture with it. You know, oh my God, it's a gun. Some women even asked for a gun when they got married, for their meher, for their dowry. So I often at times felt myself going along with the norm of the house.
But after 8 weeks in the Islamic State, Tarina said she had had enough, as she began to realize her once ISIS dream had turned into a nightmare.
I remember speaking to my mum, and I remember saying to her, I'm going to try to run away tomorrow. I'm going to try to escape. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get internet to speak to you. I can't. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep you updated on the journey, or I don't know what's going to happen because I literally don't have a plan. But if you don't hear from me, give it 1 week, then just know that I didn't make it.
Tarina managed to get to a bus station where her next plan was to get close to the Turkish border. But the bus could only get so far, so Tarina found a taxi driver.
I said to him, look, I'll give you 50 or 70 American dollars. He drove to his house and he picked up his wife. We were driving for I can't remember now, maybe like an hour, 2 hours. The driver's wife said to him, there's Turkey. So I looked at her and I said, what did you say? And she said, yeah, there's Turkey. Where them trees are, that's Turkey. And I was like, okay, stop the car. I grabbed my bag, grabbed my child, and I got out of the taxi and I just threw the money onto the seat. And as soon as I got out of the taxi, he literally sped off so fast. Maybe 200 yards to the left of me there were 3 ISIS fighters, all talking. But the way that they were positioned, they all had their back to me, and they were just, I don't know, they were talking really loudly. They were in some kind of discussion. And I remember thinking, I have just got to run now, because if any of them turn around, it's finished. And all of them had an AK-47 or some kind of rifle on their back. So I just ran over, it was like grass, like a field. And I just carried on running and running and running. And I remember thinking, with every step that I take, am I out of range of his bullet? At that moment, kind of like a Jeep or a Hummer, whatever, was approaching, and it had about 5 or 6 Turkish soldiers on there. So when they seen me, they stopped. And I think at first they thought I was Syrian, because they were like, go back, don't come here. They were shooing me away. And I was like, no, I'm British. I had my passport on me. When he seen that, he just put his arms out and he helped me over. There's no words to describe what I felt at that moment. And I remember I said to one of the soldiers, I said, if they shoot from there, will it get me? And he said, you're safe now. Nobody's going to shoot you now. You're safe.
She might have been out of reach of ISIS, but Tarina was far from out of trouble as she was flown back to the UK.
When the plane had landed, there was an announcement made by the captain that everyone needs to remain seated. There was maybe 4 or 5 officers that were walking down the aisle looking from left to right. And they were just looking at the people. And as they approached me, I stood up and I was like, I think it's me that you're looking for. The police officer spoke and she was like, right, Tarina, I'm arresting you for, and there was 5 things, really serious charges. I was just really shocked because I was under arrest. Obviously, I was shocked because I've never been arrested before.
That place is not a good place. It was horrible.
Tarina was sentenced to 6 years in prison for IS membership and for encouraging acts of terror. She served 3 years in jail before being released on license. As she sat down with me, she insists that she has been de-radicalized and is now a changed woman.
There'll be people that will listen to your story and they'll think, how does someone go from wanting to join ISIS to wanting to have nothing to do with them and to turn their life around? How do you just switch that off?
The person that I am today is the person I've been my whole life. Before I was married, I was this young, westernized girl that would go out with her friends. I chose to really risk my life to escape, to come back. And I did without help from anybody. And I did that because I made a mistake and I wanted to correct it.
People might think a mistake is getting someone's name wrong, not joining a terrorist
But we all
group.
make mistakes, though. Some people gamble away their life savings. Some people, we all make mistakes. Some people make bigger
But how
mistakes
can you
than
compare
others.
a mistake like that to joining a terrorist group?
A mistake is a mistake. I did what I did. It is a mistake. But I've since then been continuously trying to make it right.
Not only has Tarina been trying to make it right for herself, but also for her family.
The whole experience was absolutely horrendous for them. Sorry. And what I have put them through was...
Tarina believes that she was groomed online before going to join ISIS in her mid-20s in 2014. Shamima Begum, another British national, was just 15 when she fled to Syria a year later. She's still there after a UK court recently decided to ban her from ever coming back home. Yet Tarina was the first woman to be prosecuted in the UK after returning from the Islamic State. So I asked her, should Shamima be given the same treatment?
If it is genuinely the case that she wanted to like turn her back on that, she really just wants to come home, turn her back on it, change her life, change her ways, not even just hurt anybody, I would like to think that the chance is there for people to be able to do so. Yes, it is a very big mistake that people like myself and her and other women chose to do it, but it's a mistake nevertheless. And I genuinely feel if people want a second chance, then they should be able to have it. You know, I've been given a second chance and I've thrived from it. I've done really well. I've been able to get my life back, turn my back on everything. I wanted to engage with de-radicalisation. I wanted to do all of that because I knew I had made this very big mistake. Now, if I sit here and think that I might not have had that chance, it breaks my heart.
Tarina now wants to support others who have been in the same situation as her. She's recently started an organisation called Help for Hope.
The vision that I have for it, it's because I've been through the whole process, the grooming online, the rehabilitation and the reintegration. I hope that we can work on these three main aspects. Grooming online, raising awareness around it, educating around it, because it still happens, unfortunately. I have great life experience in them and hopefully, you know, I can give something back in them three areas.
If you could go back, what would you say to your younger self?
Don't go, don't do it. Absolutely. Do you regret it? I really do.
So that's the ITV video with one ex-ISIS woman, and we shall be looking for other contextual materials and evidence, and we shall continue. This is the Khoodeelaar television channel, Baby Angel Geronimo editions, and the appropriateness of the banner, the platform, the barometer platform, the barometer banner, Baby Angel Geronimo, gets evident every single time. Justified, vindicated, and upheld. There are two things in the reference from Wikipedia that we retrieved. One is that John Reith was exposed in 1975 publicly as having been an admirer of the Nazis, of Hitler, of Mussolini in the 1930s. And the other thing is that his daughter disclosed after his death, I think, that John Reith did everything possible while he was the Director General of the BBC to prevent Winston Churchill from appearing on the BBC or having a platform, because Churchill was opposed to the Nazis and Reith was an admirer of the Nazis. Can you believe that? With all these, how dare today's BBC criminals even have the temerity to even question what Gary Lineker has said? So we shall be raising this question even more strongly in the later editions. This is 23:23 hours GMT on Friday, the 10th of March 2023. And this broadcast contains 1 hour 33 minutes when we are ending this one.